if you want to take your seats, and we shall make a swift start. Is it worth going around with the introductions around the room, as we've got a couple of new faces on that?
Probably not, to be honest. I don't think so. I think everybody should know everybody.
Okay, thank you for that. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We have apologies from Councillor Akbar, Councillor Uraman and Councillor Ali. Did we have any further, Kerry? That's it, nothing that we know of? Okay, fantastic. I have no announcements or urgent business. So item 3 is declarations of interest. You've all attended often enough to know the procedure around that. If you have a declaration, now's the point to note it. Okay. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. I'm going to need to have someone move that was present, as unfortunately I was somewhere else for that meeting. Can someone move that for me? Yeah, thank you. Is that seconded? Yeah, thank you. Item number 5 is the committee work programme, and David Taylor is going to take us through it.
Yeah, this is a report for noting. It's setting out the work programme for the remainder of the municipal year, which covers this meeting and then the March meeting as well. Thank you. Okay,
are there any questions or comments on that? Very quiet this afternoon. Thank you for that. Okay, so item 6 is register of GMCA key decisions, and that's with David as well.
The report includes an appendix which sets out the current set of key decisions for the CA, which runs from the 1st of January through to 31st of March 2020. For a waste perspective, you will see on the second page the BioWaste call-off contract awards, and those are covered on reports on Part A and Part B of the agenda, so we're happy to pick up questions at that point.
Okay, we're all content with that? Give us a quick nod. Yes. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Item number 7 is the contracts update, and Justin Lomax will rattle us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The contracts update is covering the period of April to September, so that is actually Q2 of the financial year 1920. It covers the final 2 months of the interim contracts of April and May, and then running from June to September, the figures that would be part of the new Suez contracts combined. The year-to-date annual position for the total waste arisings April to September, reaching nearly 590,000 tonnes, were delivered into the facilities across both contracts. That's in the region of 1% higher than last year. For the recycling tonnages, they are slightly higher in tonnage terms, but given that the overall tonnage has increased, the actual recycling rate remains at 47%. Due to that overall increase as well. So despite the greater arisings, the landfill figure is less than last year by around 11,000 tonnes, giving a diversion rate of nearly 92%, which is actually 2% higher year on year, which is a good thing. For the HWRCs, the combination, there's 9 sites in the contract 1, the Waste and Recycling Management Services, and there's 11 sites in the HWRC management services contracts. So of those 20 sites across the board, the recycling rate was in the region of 43% and landfill diversion 89%. So the household recycling rate has has slightly decreased year on year, but the landfill diversion has increased. And then the final point we'll cover on there is the rejected loads of recycling that have been delivered to sites. There was in the region of 275 tonnes were delivered, but had to be rejected at the point of reception. And the overall MRF contamination, as in the processing of the commingled materials and the materials that weren't suitable to be segregated from by the MRF plant, that led to slightly greater than 1%. So the overall was about 19% contamination.
I'm told that the notices which are exhibited at the various recycling centres actually show a decrease in the amount of recycling. And when questioned about that, one of the operatives said that it was because of the new company that had taken over. Are you serious? Can you confirm or otherwise that situation?
Yes, I'm aware of the change in the way that recycling rates are displayed at the sites. It's a difference between the companies. So the previous company would display a combination. If you actually read the wording on the board, there was quite a lot of wording in there, and it said recycling and diversion combined. So that put together not just recycling, but also reuse and recovery. So that would inevitably give you a combined higher figure. The way that the current company Suez wants to display that is as a recycling figure, recycling only, so that not including the reuse and the recovery elements. So therefore, if you actually looked at the figures in this report, where we're describing there how the recycling rate for all the HWRCs, we've combined them for the purpose that the previous contract had all 20 sites handled together. So there has been a change, but when you look at that table, we're talking in the region of, a point, what should we say there, 0.2%. So it isn't year on year a particularly significant change. There is a significant change in diversion. Now, the work that's happening on those sites to improve the overall recycling is underway. Suez have some modelled in their SDPs that describe some measures that they would be using. Carpet and mattress recycling, recruitment drive that is underway since December. So there's a number of measures they were putting in place in order to increase recycling, but year on year hasn't changed that dramatically. What you have seen on the sites is a difference between a combination of recycling and diversion and just recycling.
But even a small, sorry, Chair. Yeah, but even a small percentage reduction can be quite a substantial amount of recycling that's not taking place. So, if this isn't addressed, if we keep getting a small amount each year going down, that's going to make a substantial difference to the amount we're recycling.
If you look in table 2.2, the table at 2.2 there, we have actually included the tonnage for recycling. So yes, where you can see that percentage rate there does show in the region of 1,000 tonnes. That hasn't been lost to landfill, has been regained in the recycling and diversion figure, if you like, combined. So it's gone to diversion. But you are correct that we do need to work with the contractor to make sure that recycling, the direction of travel goes back in towards increasing that tonnage and making sure that despite there has been quite a significant increase in the overall tonnage presented to us across the range of materials, that we still want to make sure that recycling rate is increasing, and that is measured within the contract methods and mechanisms to make sure that they are motivated towards increasing recycling.
Okay, I had Councillor Lally indicated first.
Thank you, Chair. It was kind of almost like a supplementary to Councillor Garrido there. I mean, I know obviously the biggest difference in the 2 years are the rejection rates, which is it seems to be going in the right direction in respect of that, because it's reduced by 50% almost. But I was wanting to ask more of a reporting, not necessarily operational difference between the previous contract and the current contractor, but from your point of view and how they measure things differently or do things differently in a reporting sense. And was there anything that you would highlight to the committee in respect of how they do that differently, that you've had to then adjust that from an internal point of view? Do you understand where I'm coming from in that respect?
I think what you're asking there is, has the base reporting data been assembled in a way that measures or collates these figures differently to the previous contract? The answer to that is no. What we do in this part of the agenda is look at it as a whole. So you are right in the contracts that there is a division between what we call Lot 1, which is the Waste Recycling Management Services, and Lot 2, the Household Waste Recycling Centre Management Services. So in the Part B of the agenda, we'd look at those separately as 2 contracts. But what we do is we combine them to be able to give the year-on-year comparison. We have to put them in a baseline order that we understand when we can. So this is compiled by us. The company doesn't do this, not least because April and May was part of a previous contract with a different company.
It's just to sort of understand sort of the data coming in, because obviously, we're all fantastic at manipulating numbers when we
the raw data that we verify as part of both the contracts for the invoice, but also the contract data that we put together comes from weighbridge tickets on the weighbridge system. So when a vehicle arrives, it's the weight of the vehicle taken away from the gross weight taken away to get the net weight. That's then verified by the delivery from whichever district delivered that material. And we start with that raw data and we compile from there for two reasons. One, because then the data is absolutely from the loads being delivered to the sites. And secondly, the invoice that then is raised against that has to be accurate, both for the districts to be able to say to us, we believe we did deliver that exact tonnage. There's no rounding, and it's down to kilograms.
Any district process kind of thing, is that it's not going to vary from one contractor to another in that respect?
No, because this is a vehicle on a weighbridge, a set of scales, and we take that, and we collate it from our point of view, and then compare it to what they say. If it's different, then we go through the verification process to align that, but that reconciliation literally is down to kilograms.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Quinn.
Just on page 21 around the bottom, you know, the MER contamination rate is showing like an upward trend. The gut feeling that is probably plastic. So the question is, a lot of the education
Councillor Quinn, could you pop your microphone on?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, so what would, on the English waste strategy, which was published, the government were talking about the ERP, the extended producer responsibility, i.e. the plastic tax, and the deposit return scheme. So my question is, are we going to get any additional money from government to fund the education schemes? Because we've been, because of austerity, our education teams are not what they were. And on the other one, are the government made any waves that they are going to bring in a DRS and an ERP, which should get the recycling rates up?
I think the answer on all of those is we're waiting to find out. So at the moment, government is still going through the process of preparing the waste strategy. We're anticipating further rounds of consultation will be issued in the next few months. I don't have a definitive time frame on that. That will cover the extended producer responsibility, the deposit return scheme. On the Let's Recycle website recently, DEFRA ministers were on there saying that money would be available to local authorities to fund additional collection schemes. But again, the details are very light at the moment. We don't know if that will be funded for evermore or whether that is just an initial pump priming money to get collection systems set up. So in answer to all of your questions, it's going to be revealed over the next 12 months as further rounds of consultation come out through central government. And on your point around European funding, I don't have an answer to that. There's been no announcement from government on that.
On that English waste strategy, what looked like was happening was that there would be, by law, 2 extra collections. So we go from in Greater Manchester 4-bin system to a 6-bin system. One of them would be weekly food collections. Now, if that happens, again, this committee was quite vocal in saying we don't want that because we think we can treat the kitchen waste with the garden waste, and we don't want that. Have we made our representations to the government that, and basically the household of Greater Manchester, a lot of them haven't got room for another 2 bins? Thanks, Chair.
In our response to the first round of consultation, that was the response we put back against the prescribed 6 collection schemes. We're also getting some analysis done which will look at both the financial and the environmental implications of a separate food waste collection as compared to the current collection system. That will then feed into the next consultation response that we submit.
Councillor Lancaster. Could you bob your mic on?
The part 2 item. It's not working. Oh, yeah, it is. Give Councillor Garrido about the waste recycling centres and the way the percentages differs because of the culmination of the joint allocation. Later on in the agenda, it shows that the waste recycling centres was only 35.96, which is a considerable drop. Yeah.
That's a separate figure that is taken out, not 20 sites combined, but 9 of those sites combined. What one part of the contract.
Right. So it's not.
Discuss that in further detail. But that's what I've done here, so we can get a year-on-year. Beg your pardon. But what I've done here is so that there's a year-on-year comparison. I've just taken it months to date, so April to September, rather than separating it into the contract areas, because that would mean April and May would be the run-off contract, as we call it, the interim contract. This would then be separated into 9 sites for the WRMS and then 11 sites for the HWR CMS, which is quite a complex way to show a year-on-year. So you're right that you will see a different figure there. It's been combined into one to give you a year-to-date figure for quarter 2. What you're looking at there is from June to September for 9 sites, which is the contract for Suez.
Would it be possible, not necessarily every meeting, but we have an update on how each site is performing?
We can certainly look at that site improvements, how that's doing in the areas. Yeah, we've certainly some information that we've collated for you in the past that we could do. We could look at that, yes.
Okay, if there's no further questions, Councillor Lancaster, could I ask you to?
Yeah, sure.
I know they're a bit of a faff, aren't they? So if you want a call to speak, if you just bob your mic on when you've completed speaking, bob it back on, off again. It can be picked up easier on the live feed with the microphones on. Okay, so we shall move on to item 8, which is budget and levy, which Lindsay's taking us through.
Thank you, Chair. This is the proposed budget and levy for 2021 and an outline of the medium-term financial plan for the following 3 years. The forecast outturn for 1920 is expected to be broadly in line with budget, subject to the adjustments at paragraph 2.2, which shows the levy adjustments to each district from the tonnage variations. The revenue budget for 2021, we're recommending a reduction in the budget and levy of 4.2% and are forecasting a further reduction in 21-22 before it then returns to more inflationary increases in the following years. The 4.2% is a global decrease, translates into a range of -2.3% to -6.6% across the district based on tonnage increases or decreases at that district level. Recommendation 2 of the report is to note the trade waste rate for 21-22. Details can be found in paragraph 3.4. We set this a year in advance to give districts some certainty, and it's just linked to inflation. At 3.5, the capital programme is just summarised there. Full details are included in Appendix A, and the revenue consequences of that programme have been built into these forecast figures. Section 4, we've included the headline forecast for the following years. Shows a reduction for 21-22 before returning to the inflationary increases. Forecasts have been set against assumptions on waste flows, so the waste flows provided by your district officers have been put through there, the flows through the facilities, and we've also assumed no change in national policies at this time as it's too unknown to us. And then just at section 6, I can confirm that we've reviewed the risks to this waste budget and that we consider reserves are sufficient at this time. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Bestford, please.
Just a couple of quick ones. 2.2, the charge and the refunds. Can you talk a little bit about what Rochdale and Tameside are doing differently to mean that they've been charged rather than refunded? And the second question was on Appendix B, the forecast, the projections. They've got the levy is decreasing in 21-22, but then moving forward to the final 2 years of the forecast, it's increasing. Can you just talk a little bit about where those figures have come from? Thanks.
So in 2.2, the charges and refunds are based on tonnage forecasts provided from your districts. So you would really have to go back to your district officer to get a full answer on that.
So essentially, you gave us a projection that said you were going to bring in 100,000 tonnes of waste, and what actually has turned up is 105,000 tonnes using numbers. So you're picking up an additional cost because you've brought extra waste into the system.
And the second question, so yes, so next year, just the effect of any modifications coming out, so we've got increased costs in this year for modifications, they drop out next year, and then we're just going back into more inflationary increases, just with some predictions on waste flow numbers as well.
Thanks, Chair. Essentially, it was a repeat of the question that we had in the briefing beforehand. It's essentially go back to your local authority officer, because it's us that generate those figures for you to correlate, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Is there any further questions? No? Okay, there are a list of recommendations that I don't propose I read out to you, but if we can note that report. Happy to note it? Yes, thank you very much. Okay. Item 9 is Household Waste Recycling Centre Access Restrictions, the Communications Plan, and Michelle's going to take us through it.
Thanks, Chair. So I've put in the report a copy of the communications plan, and I've not got a presentation, but what I have done is brought copies of the leaflets and the trade waste pack that are being handed out at the HWRC, so I'll leave them on the side for you to take after, so you've got a copy and you can see what they look like. I will say that since I've put the communications plan together, obviously things have changed, and this is a live document, so depending on what happens in the media, we will adjust our communications accordingly. But we started our communications in December with the Let's Scrap Fly Tipping campaign, and the purpose of that was to get out messages about what traders should be doing, what their duty of care is, and how they shouldn't be bringing their waste to the household waste recycling centres. And then that followed on with some updates to the Recycle for Greater Manchester website, to start putting information out about the policy, what the changes would be, what it would mean to a resident. I'm not going to go through all of the different individual types of communications, but I will say that I've also put together some stats on how the communications has been going that you can pick up at the end. We've done some advertising in local papers about how you can use the recycling centres and what the changes are likely to be, with some images here of the ANPR display boards that have been implemented, a reminder about the height barrier, a reminder to separate out your waste, and what the changes mean to residents. It is worth saying that the Manchester Evening News did pick up over Christmas that and started reporting that people can only come to the tip once a week, and that's obviously not true. So it is 52 times in a year, and it was set at a deliberately high level because our research shows that on average a family will use the household waste recycling centres once a month, so 52 a year is quite generous. And again, the whole purpose of this is to flush out the traders that are using the sites illegally, not to penalise residents. So it's not in the report, but I have been speaking to the Manchester Evening News about running a feature on a day in the life of a sewers operative and how they will, what they do day to day and the difficulties that traders cause us. So just picking up on comments earlier, the problem with trade waste is that it forces down the recycling rates because the type of material they tend to bring in is general waste. So again, if we can get these traders out of the sites, it should push up the recycling rates. So that's one of the measures that sewers are implementing to address that issue. We've also started to put, in response to some of the questions that we've had on social media, we've started to compile a list of frequently asked questions that we've shared with the district officers, and we'll put them on our site, and we'll constantly keep updating those, because we've had all sorts of questions from residents about my vehicles are such and how does this affect me. So we're collating all of these and updating the information on our website all the time. One thing that has worked quite well is some digital display advertising. It's the first time that we've tried this, and what that means is that on websites such as Auto Trader and B&Q, we're running some advertising that's based on an algorithm about duty of care. So we're pushing messages out to traders so that they understand what their duty of care is and the fact that they shouldn't be using the house or waste recycling centres. And we've actually had just over 1 million impressions through that, and quite a good click-through rate onto our website. So that's another piece of advertising that's worked quite well. So there's a whole combination of advertising and media coverage. We're also advertising in lots of local publications and the local newspapers. And as I said, handing out leaflets on site. So these are getting directly to our customers and getting the information out there. I think that was everything I wanted to say. And what I will point out as well, if you take a copy of the Trade Waste Guide, is that it's quite detailed. And so the traders are not just being banned, we're actually giving them the information they need to do the right thing. So telling them where the weighbridges are, telling them to contact their local council. So if the council do a commercial collection, go and speak to your council about setting one of those up, or hire a skip. So it's quite a detailed guide of information for traders. So I'll leave these for you at the end, and also there's a report that just details some of the communications that we've done and some of the results that we've had. So has anybody got any questions?
Reporting on any name, perhaps?
Your hands back up, okay. I'm
Yeah.
working from that way to that way, yeah.
Just while we're working through who's got questions, there is also just a brief operational update in the report. So anybody that's been on the site recently, you should have seen the automatic number plate recognition boards now. So as you drive in, your registration will flash up as you go through. That's being tested with the links through to the operatives' phones on site and the collation of that information in the system. Suez have now also got around 50 additional staff recruited. There's a further 15 or so still to be recruited, but they should be in post by the commencement date of 10th of February. And those new staff are currently going through their training on what the policy means, customer care, and also how to deal with confrontational situations as well. So there's a full suite of training being given to them. One of the other areas that we are looking at just collating some data is around walk-ins as well. So what we're now starting to see is a lot of traders are parking up outside, and then they are opting to walk their waste onto site in an attempt to avoid the number plate recognition. So what that's doing is it's then causing issues in the surrounding streets with congestion, waste being dropped. So we are reviewing on a site-by-site basis what we may need to look at with district support around parking restrictions, and also what our policy around walking in of waste will be. If they're traders, they shouldn't be coming in at all, so we need to stop that. And there's also an issue around managing that interaction. On a lot of sites, you can't segregate pedestrians from vehicles, so we need to address that anyway. So we're working through the data, and we will bring back some proposals to the March committee to look at on a site-by-site basis how we manage this, principally to stop traders getting around the system and then walking waste onto site.
Okay, so the fairest way is you all put your hands up at the same time, because I started that end and I've worked around. So we'll apologise if you think you stuck your hand up before someone else, but it's the only way I could kind of catch you all. So I'm starting with Councillor Torr.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. The message regarding the number of visits, like 52 a year. A lot of my residents, they're asking questions, things like, is there one visit per week, and what happens if they exceed the visit? And also, is there any, are we planning to evaluate the effectiveness of this policy, or measuring the success, or how successfully we managed to stop the commercial waste and the general residents? Are they, not penalised unfairly? So just a clarification around the communication.
Yeah, so the limit is 52 in a year, so you can use that however you want. So if you come 3 times a week, that's fine, as long as it doesn't exceed 52 a year. And we feel that nobody should exceed that, and if they are, you would really question why do they need to come. So the site operatives will be monitoring, and they can detect trader behaviour by the number of visits. So if they suspect a trader, it's because they're visiting 2 or 3 times a day, or every day in a week. And then the operatives, the first step is they stop and chat to them and ask them what the waste is and where it's come from. And if it is deemed to be trade waste, they'll be asked to leave the site and be given a guide and some information about where they should be going. And if it is a householder that can't cope, then we'd refer that to the council officer and ask them to talk to the resident about, have they got all their bins at home? Is there a reason why they have to come more than the 52 times a year? So we won't be stopping residents from, attending the site, but we will be having those conversations about what waste are they bringing? Is it definitely household waste? And why do they need to come so often? Because at the end of the day, we really want to drive recycling up and reduce the waste arisings down.
Can I pick up your second question? On your second question about evaluating the success of this, what we have done is established a working group which has got a number of district officers on, and we're working jointly with Suez looking at the implementation plan, and the intention is that group will be maintained, and we'll be looking at performance of the scheme after 6 months and 12 months. And the way we'll be looking at that is partly on tonnages, partly looking at on-site and to assess the number of traders coming through the system, and also using the ANPR really to see how effective this has been. But all of that information will be collated, it will be fed back through to the committee as we go through the course of the next 12 months.
I mean, just on your first point, I mean, councillors will know that each of your local authorities, I know mine certainly does, has officers who support residents who can't cope with and would be attending the household recycling site more than once a week. Perhaps they've got a particularly large family, or they've got specific needs within those households, and it would be unfair to them if they're having to take their waste to the recycling site, when actually potentially the local authority can help them to be able to cope by giving them bigger bins or different solutions if they are an exceptional household. And we all run those schemes that would assist those residents in that way. So next up, I've got Councillor Besford.
Thanks. Just 2 questions on this. The first is that if sewers operatives are finding that traders are trying to use the site repeatedly, repeat offenders, what is the process for enforcing that? Will they be reporting to local authorities directly, or is it just a matter of turning them away as and when they come through? And the second thing is that one of the most common queries that we've had from residents is saying, oh, it's going to increase fly tipping and all that kind of thing. I would just wonder whether there's any way we can track increasing of fly tipping so that we can either dispel that or try and find other ways to tackle it.
So picking up the first question around enforcement, the Suez operatives will be gathering information. That information will come to us. We will then share it with the appropriate district, and working together, provided we've got sufficient evidence, then we would be looking at district support to take that through an enforcement process, which might be fixed penalty notice, it could be a court order, or it could be a more serious issue if it is an offence like fly tipping, for instance. So that's being worked on jointly with the districts. So on the fly tipping side of things, each district has to report fly tipping incidents into a database called Fly Capture. GMCA doesn't have access to that. It sits within each of the districts. We've got the baseline position for 2018-19, and what we'll be doing is working with the districts to track fly tipping data over the coming 12-month period. Now, the only issue that I will say with that is we can't sort of drill down into it to, for example, Chichester Street being your Rochdale site, we won't be able to tell whether there's been an increase in incidents within a radius of that site. It's very much high-level information, but we can look at that to see what the underlying trend is over the course of the last year and whether anything has changed. But we won't specifically be able to tie it back to this, I don't think, but it will give an indication. So I think, I mean, what the data I've seen for 18-19 does show is there's quite a variability between districts, but it also shows that fly tipping is a problem everywhere now anyway. But we can look at that information and continue to track it.
Councillor Warren, I think, was next.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points really. So even though I personally think 52 times a year is quite a high number, it's the perception to residents that they're having something taken away from them. So we had a newspaper article and the public outcry about having restrictions placed on how many times they could go to the recycling centres was quite high. But I do think what will happen once they reach 52 was a little bit of a weak message, because online it's basically the staff will speak to you, see that, make sure you live in GM excluding Wigan, and they'll just make sure it's household waste. So it's, but a lot of residents are thinking, will I be banned? How long will that ban last? There's quite a lot of misconceptions. And even though we are trying to put out the message of actually speak to us, you know, we'll send a recycling officer around to come and have a chat with you, that they're not kind of picking up on it. They're just seeing that I'm having my access to the tip removed. So that's the first point.
May I interject, Chair, on that very point, because I think there is a solution here in that we could get a correction from Manchester Evening News for reporting something that is slightly different to what the actual message is. And therefore, under the corrections and clarifications, you know, that people have got a perception suddenly of a misinformation, and it should be readdressed in the way that you want it to be readdressed. Because 52 times a year, although it sounds like it's once a week, that is not the policy. And I think that's where the perception that my colleague and obviously colleagues around this table are going to suggest has happened. So the cause of the problem is the MEN. We need to speak to them and get a correction and clarification. I think that will go some way to amending the perception that's been built up from colleagues around this table. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. The second part as well was regarding hire vehicles. So I've had quite a lot of inquiries about what will happen because you could have a van that's been 300 times that year. So it's how that data will be collected from a resident who says hiring a van to do a garden clearance or some work that they're doing in the garden, you know, and they're then taking things to the recycling centre. So it's how things will work for both the company and as well the residents that are hiring the vans.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not surprised at residents' reaction, because if you change anything, like when you've changed your bin collections, there's always this initial worry that you're taking a service away from me. So I completely understand. And we are going to do some more PR and work around. It's not targeted at you, it's targeted at the traders. So you're not going to get banned, nothing bad is going to happen. But we really do need to set a limit for everybody so that we can flush out the traders. It's not about penalising residents. I agree about what you said about the MEN, and I am talking to them about their misleading title and their article. I have had some discussions with them, and they have printed some other articles since then, but that one's already out. Unfortunately, they picked it up because they've obviously seen the leaflets on site. So I understand what you're saying about residents, but I don't think it would get to the point where they'd go 52 times and then all of a sudden they'd get banned at the 53rd time. There would be a conversation before that point, because the ANPR would flag up that there's unusual behaviour and that a vehicle is coming too many times in a month, and they would be spoken to before that. While they're being spoken to, the sewers operative can then find out if that looks like trade waste actually because you've been in 3 times and it's plumbing waste or whatever it is. It's that they know who the traders are on site already. They've already worked that out. You can see the activity on site. So this isn't about penalising residents. So if they are coming a lot, and it is household waste, again, as Councillor Gwynne said, it would be referred back to the council officer, and with support from them, we'd get them the help they needed to manage their waste. So this really isn't about penalising residents, but we've had to set a limit to be able to run the policy to flush out those traders. And again, about the hire vehicles, they're asked to bring their documents, their hire vehicle documents. So some people do hire a van to do a big clear out. And again, the ANPR would track that vehicle. And if that vehicle just came back time and time again, week after week, you'd start to question whether that was trade waste or if that is just a resident doing a one-off clearance. So again, this isn't really about clamping down on residents. It's about the traders and making sure we flush those out of the system. And some of that will just be done by conversations with the Suez staff on site of, you know, when the traders realise that they're being clamped down and they're being asked questions, some of them will naturally not come back. And then we can start to take enforcement actions with those that are just persistent and just keep coming back.
Okay, then we shall move on down to Councillor Foster-Grime. Did you get it before?
I don't think he did, but I don't mind.
I'll let you go for it, ladies, and then Roy can go.
Thank you, Roy. Issues have already been raised, and I have been in touch with yourselves because of the slightly misleading headlines. We have experienced a few of the same questions and concerns in Stockport, but I think we're hopefully getting the message through now. And actually, not many Stockport residents read the Manchester Evening News, so that has probably been in this limited case, and that is a fact. The circulation particularly low, although some of them look online. It was a misleading headline. It caused a lot of confusion, but thank you very much to yourself, Michelle, and to David for clarifying those points for me when you hadn't even finished your Christmas and New Year break. It was very much appreciated. My question is therefore on data protection. This is something that has been raised with me by a number of colleagues and residents. You know, as you know, we've got GDPR, the Act, Data Protection Act 2018. Nobody's exactly sure what's happening with future legislation in the UK precisely at this moment in time in terms of European directives, UK legislation, which may have been led by that. So there are concerns about how this data protection is how the data that we do collate through this AMPR system is going to be processed. What are the limits on retention and storage? Is it proposed that any of this will be shared commercially? And what protection do ordinary residents, which this policy is designed to assist in the long term, what safeguards and protections is there on this data and this vehicle technology being used? So it may not be a question that you can answer straight away, but I assume that the authority has had a look into this particular issue in the use of this technology.
Well, I will say we have had conversations with our Information Governance Department here in the GMCA and fully explored what it means to collect the ANPR data. So we've also got a frequently asked question about that we will pop on our website about the fact that we do store it and it's stored on site at Suez in secure servers. And we're only collecting registration numbers, so there are no personal details held about any resident, or we don't have that's not linked to DVLA either, so we can't collect any further information apart from a registration number. So the idea is that registration number will be flagged up if it visits site on a very frequent basis, and that information will be sent to a handheld PDA for a Suez representative to then go and talk to the owner of that vehicle. So apart from using it to flag up a frequent visit by a vehicle, we haven't got any other personal data. And I know, Justin, you've been working quite closely with Information Governance to put together a privacy policy that will be displayed on our website. Yes, we have checked and double-checked, obviously you have to do with GDPR to make sure we're fully compliant.
A quick one. I'm sure this probably isn't the case, but is CCTV currently used alongside this vehicle recognition technology or not at these household waste recycling centres.
Yeah, I'll take that, Jen. CCTV is in place on the site. ANPR is a separate system, and equally body cameras will be used where appropriate on site also. Those are 3 separate areas. The AMPR system we will be the owner and controller of, with the contractor being the processor. For the CCTV, that will be a Suez system. That isn't to be used in conjunction with this policy. That would be used for the purposes of security and operational reasons on the site, and that information would be controlled and owned by the contractor. So this wouldn't be taking images to be used in conjunction with this policy. On the CCTV side, that would be for the security and Suez operational.
Councillor Driver, and then I've got Councillor Quinn after.
Okay, I've got 2 questions, or a question in 2 parts. It's really related to the larger vehicles, the vehicles up to 3.5 tonnes, which are small vans, and those above 3.5 tonnes, which are larger vans. Now, in the first part of the question, is that disabled people, particularly wheelchair users, may have vehicles of this type because it's adapted to their particular needs, but maybe they may be using the vehicles themselves, or a friend may be using the vehicles to legitimately dispose of household waste. What provision would you make to ensure that, say, someone's using a vehicle of that type, he's treated as a normal resident, i.e. as if they had a car, and just because they've got a larger vehicle because of their disability, they're not in any way discriminated against, even indirectly? And the second one is also related to these large vehicles. I know you mentioned about use of hire vehicles before, but a particular question has been raised to me. What would happen if, say, somebody who was not a resident, say, inherits a property in Stockport and has hired a larger vehicle to, first off, empty the property and then maybe undertake substantial works on the property to bring it up to a standard for resale or to rent out or whatever. And obviously they're not a GM resident, but obviously I think whether legal or moral, we would say it's reasonable for them to use the house or to decant their property. So
I'll take your first point, and it's a very good point, and it's one that we've been asked very recently. So a resident emailed us in and asked, I've got one of these disability vehicles that's classed as a van, but obviously it's to put a wheelchair in the back of it. And our reply was that will just be treated as a standard vehicle and would be entitled to 52 visits a year as any other vehicle. And we have come across quite a few of these anomalies where people have asked, I've got a specific type of vehicle, and obviously we're building up a big list of all of these different types of vehicles to make sure that they're not discriminated against. So absolutely, anyone in a disability vehicle will be entitled to 52 a year as a normal standard car. Your second point is slightly more complicated because obviously if they're not a Greater Manchester resident, they're not paying council tax in Greater Manchester and really shouldn't be entitled use of the household waste recycling centres, which is paid for by council taxpayers. So if it's okay with you, I'll take that away and look into it a bit more and give you a proper full answer.
I would have to suspect that we're looking at quite to the edge of the exceptions rather than the rule. And I think that we would concur that the system, when you apply the test of reasonableness, I think it is a system that can work well for the vast majority of residents, and just a few tweaks around very specifics of exceptional circumstances. And I think if we can make sure that those are accommodated, I think that the vast majority of residents who are actually residents and not traders will not see any difference to this system and the way that they legitimately access the waste sites. Okay, shall we move on if we're happy to note that report?
Councillor Quinn.
Sorry, Councillor Quinn, I almost forgot you there. I do apologise.
It's not a question, Chair. I mean, what we're talking about is the problem is traders, and Greater Manchester is coming into line with the rest of the northwest of England because these traders, they're ripping us off, they're misusing a public facility. They know what the score is. They should have a trader's licence. They should take it to the appropriate facility because when Billy the Builder's at your house, that's what he charges you for. And if he's not doing that, he's probably making a nice little bit on the side. And I've had this, there's this misnomer when they say, oh, God, it's going to increase fly tipping. Well, what is fly tipping? It's a criminal activity because it's judged in the court of law. And when we clear stuff up in Bury, it goes to landfill at Pillswood because a lot of the time the mattresses are that soggy and dirty and horrible, and the stuff is that battered. It has to go to landfill, and it costs us £300 a tonne at least. But what it also does, it takes my teams in Bury off doing what they should be doing. They should be emptying the bins in the streets of Bury. They should be cleaning up the leaves. They should be tidying up the parks, but they're not because they're dealing with a criminal activity. Now, when we got a new tumble dryer last year, me and Mrs. Quinn, we paid for the old one to be taken away. 20 quid, that's the right thing to do. I didn't sneak it into the middle of Prestwich at night because that's the wrong thing. And these people are criminals. And finally, yeah, I have been down to the household waste recycling centres and I've spoken to the lads at the team. And what they say is, yeah, they know where it is, same old faces, they're taking the mickey. And it is right and proper that we start to say no, because this is costing us money. The biggest gripe as councillors you get is your council taxes going up. And one of them is, yeah, because we have to pay for criminals and people just misusing our facilities. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that, and apologies for completely forgetting you at the bottom of my list there. Okay, so content with that report, we shall move on to item 10, which is BioWaste Treatment Capacity Procurement. Paul is taking us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I should be brief on this because there's more commercial detail in Part B of the meeting because of clearly some of the sensitivities around the information and discussions we'll have. Members will recall that last year we concluded the procurement for a number of waste services, one of which was for the treatment of the biowaste, the mixed garden and food waste collected from properties within Greater Manchester. That was as a result of the third lot of the procurement failing, and we decided to take a slightly different route because of the forthcoming waste strategy, and it gives us a chance to review our own infrastructure. An innovative approach was taken at the time to set a framework up so that we could procure contractors, a number of contractors, to spread some of the competition and some of the capacity across the market, to secure a framework so that we could let a Part A package, which is basically the garden waste and the food waste, we could guarantee because it's a block, and then a Part B, Package B, which is effectively the seasonal fluctuations, because we're not very good at assessing how plants are going to grow in the good or bad weather. So that second package was only let for a year. The first package was let for 2 years. So the second package is coming up to a time when it needs to be renewed. It needs to be renewed, so it starts again on the 1st of June. We have come to you early because there's elections coming up, so we thought we'd start the process early so it doesn't enter into purdah when people have got other things on their minds as well. So we're coming to you to make a decision on that in Part B, but that is the approach we'll be taking. We'll be going back to the market to secure the smaller packages for the seasonal garden waste. Any questions?
Any questions, or are we all cool with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. We note that report and move on to item 11, which is Brexit Preparedness. As if I could get that wrong. Brexit Preparedness. Paul.
Thank you very much. A bit easier, Brexit. Right. Through a number of committees and perhaps through this forum as well, members sought to have an update to what the waste services across Greater Manchester are looking to prepare for the possibility of what was going to be possibly a no-deal or hard Brexit, as it was termed. And obviously with the general election, we have a bit of greater clarity in terms of what's going to happen, but there is still the possibility of leaving the European Union without an arrangement for reciprocal rights at the end of the year, depending how things go. So we've come to you to provide an update on what's happening and for you to note and comment on the report as you see fit as you come to the end. We did look very closely across the authority and with Suez, our contractor, at a number of potential risks to the delivery of services that Brexit may well have if we were unable to trade or had problems in moving waste around. So we've looked at the possibility of delayed exportation of waste, issues to the importation of goods for our waste facilities, potential access to fuel, because obviously we run a lot of vehicles across Greater Manchester moving waste about, so access to fuel is a key issue, and also availability of staff if some of those staff were foreign nationals, whether they would still be able to attend their workplaces or still desire to attend their workplaces following leaving the European Union. Suez, luckily for us, are an international company, and they've made great efforts to look at this issue both nationally, locally, nationally and internationally. Being a French company as well, they have a lot of insight from the other side to see how things may well impact services and goods coming this way. So we're able to pick on their experience from that side. And also, we'll all remember with fondness or otherwise the fuel blockade in 2000, where we all learnt a lot about fuel availability, and a lot of that experience has been used as well. So looking at delayed waste exports, we don't export a lot of waste. We export some plastics or some paper along the way, but not an awful amount. So we shouldn't be hit particularly hard. But depending on how arrangements are at borders, there is a possibility that anything that's going out across the sea, either in a lorry or in a container, may well be held up, could well be held up at a border as there are new checks in place. And if there's new checks, there'll be delays, and there'll be, as some people have suggested, a backlog of vehicles all queued up. This could have an implication to us because it means that we've either got vehicles on the road stuck at ports, so we can't fill new vehicles up, or basically we just can't get the waste out of our facilities. So we have to be mindful of how we deal with those, deal with that backlog. We can perhaps stockpile some extra stuff with Environment Agency approval. They'll give us site-by-site approval to extend its storage if they see fit, and it's demonstrated there will be no local harm either to the amenity or to the environment. There's also another issue that some of the wastes may attract tariffs if we are exporting them. That's a particularly grey area. I've spent a lot of time, perhaps far too much time, trying to work out how the tariff system works if you're a third country outside of the EU. And I think I found that there won't be any tariffs, but again, it comes down to how we leave at the time. And I'm no expert on World Trade Organization tariffs. This may well then result in, and I've got a bit of a flow chart here, which you may be able to see, that if there is a hard Brexit and or no ability to come to an agreement and we leave without a deal, we will receive waste as normal to our waste transfer stations. Then we would load our vehicles, and then we would send them off to the ports for export if that was where they were going. Those vehicles may well be delayed through, as I said earlier, through documentation checks, perhaps a lack of familiarity initially with all drivers and companies because they won't be familiar with the paperwork. Vehicles then won't go out, so they won't come back, so we won't be able to load them again, so they will be delayed. It could well be then that we need to seek alternative outlets within the UK for those materials. In a lot of cases, if those outlets were there, we'd be using them. Suez are very keen to use UK as we are, use UK facilities. Again, we can store the waste, as I mentioned. And if our sites become full or we're not allowed to store, then we basically have a choice then potentially to either landfill the materials or to burn it at our various facilities. Also remembering that a number of other local authorities, or all local authorities, will be in a very similar position, so there'll be a call on that capacity. So there'll be issues there in terms of reputation, but ultimately, and as a last resort measure, perhaps we should stop collecting the stuff in the first place, because if we've got nowhere to take it, then really we'll be filling vehicles up that can't be emptied. So the ultimate may be that we don't collect it. Importation of goods. We run a number of facilities, such as our materials recovery facilities, our energy from waste facility, and that they need critical supplies. Some of the chemicals, for example, on air pollution control equipment, that the energy from waste, some of those chemicals are imported from across various stretches of water. Suez have gone to great lengths to assess their supply chains. They have got in extra supplies of chemicals where they needed to. They've also identified alternative disposal points, so that if there is an issue and they can't run a facility, they can take the material elsewhere. Again, some of those may well be what we consider undesirable disposal points, landfilling, good recycling, for example, but if needs must, we may have no alternative. Access to fuel. This is perhaps the most interesting or contentious one. Anyone who read the Operation Yellowhammer documents that was leaked and then formally published sometime last year will note that it says they don't envisage any impact on fuel within the UK. There may be local inaccessibility to forecourts if they happen to be at a port and then they're blocked in by lines of lorries. There's also the possibility of what they euphemistically call customer behaviour. I presume that's panic buying in terms of fuel, and that causing an issue in terms of supply. And if supply is cut, we don't know if there's going to be an immediate guillotine and we can't get any, or it'll just be a gradual reduction of the availability of fuel. The waste collection authorities are covered by legislation and are given priority status when it comes to access to fuels. They've also, a lot of them, they will keep their vehicles topped up every night to ensure their tanks are full so they can get out and collect and make sure any on-site tanks as well are also as full as they can be, and make sure their supplies are guaranteed from their suppliers. Unfortunately, waste disposal authorities aren't considered in the same boat, so there may well be some issues with the supply of fuel to waste disposal authorities, but SUEs tell us they have access to forecourts and a number of alternative arrangements. Again, if we have to look at reducing services, there will be a prioritisation of waste collections. As you'd expect, the non-recyclable residual waste bin will be considered a key priority in terms of collection, as will the bio-waste. So if we have to reduce collection frequency, those two particular streams will be the ones that are considered the most important. And then we'll look at, if we have to, reducing the collection frequency of commingled recycling from where they are, whether they're 2 weeks or 3 weeks to 4 weeks, and the same with the pulpables. Those two particular streams perhaps are the ones going to cause the least concerns to householders. But then how this may work in reality, if fuel supplies are unaffected, then it's happy days, we carry on as we are. If fuel is suddenly stopped, then we can look then to introducing that hierarchy of collection changes. However, that may seem unlikely that fuel is suddenly not available. So if it's reduced slowly, and this is quite hard to tell because officers won't know whether they're going to get fuel supplies or not going to get fuel supplies, then you're only going to know on a creeping basis, and then you'll have to come to a decision point where you do actually have to reduce your collection frequencies. And different authorities may be dealt with and may be impacted in different ways depending on the supplies they have. But these are the kind of things that have been looked at across Greater Manchester, so we hopefully are in a very informed position. And finally, availability of staff, this on two levels. If we have foreign nationals working for us and their right to work, that may mean that there are some staffing shortages. SUEs tell us that they do have foreign nationals working for them, but as far as they are aware, they have all registered to the Rights to Settle scheme that the government has run. So we're pretty confident from that perspective, staff are okay. The only other aspect is if, for whatever reason, shortage of fuel or anything, they are unable to attend their workplaces. So those will be dealt with as and when they arise. Another key issue potentially is a shortage of drivers. They may well become, if you've got an HGV licence, you may well become quite a commodity if there are issues with moving stuff around the country where there's spare lorries but not enough drivers because they're stuck at ports. If you've got a licence, you might be quite employable for that period of time. So there may be issues potentially with drivers seeking more lucrative work elsewhere in the short term. In terms of mitigating those, there's existing publicity in place for ensuring staff have signed up to the settlement schemes. SUEs have reviewed their workforce, as I've said, and they do have a reduced reliance on agency staff and are pretty clear that their core workforce should be able to and will be able to attend work subject to any access to transport. So in summary, uncertainty does persist. I think some pressure has come off in terms of certainly within the GMCA in terms of planning, but we keep looking at it, and there are fortnightly, if not monthly, meetings to make sure that everything is being looked at and the latest position is being considered and that guidance from government is taken into account along the way. We think we've looked at most of all of the significant risks when it comes to this and looked at the mitigations. I'm sure there are, should this happen, there will be things that come out of the woodwork that we weren't necessarily aware of or didn't figure in our thinking, but we'll address those as they come. There is a potential for risks to interrelate if there's hold-ups at the port as well as fuel. You know, some of these issues may well compound themselves and bring on eventual mitigation sooner rather than later. So that's had to be figured into our planning, but again, it's quite hard to plan for something you're not quite sure how it's going to pan out. And if risk to materials will ensure working with the districts, there is communications plans in place to keep both members and service users informed, but it'll be a bit of a moving feast if it happens. Thank you. Any questions?
Anyone got anything they want to contribute? We're all happy with that? Councillor Foster-Grime.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Paul for the report. I know I've certainly been vociferous for quite some time since we're at the recycling centre in the last cycle of meetings. It is important. I suspect personally that some of the worst scenario risks that may take place will not be until after the transition period, and of course we don't know what the situation is. But I do thank you, because it is important that you know, that we're kept informed, and actually, you know, this gives us, as far as is possible, some reassurance, you know, that the Waste Authority is looking very closely at these potential risks. Just one comment. We talk about foreign nationals. I know it's difficult how to put this down on a slide, but I think we all need to be mindful of the fact that they are just non-UK born nationals, and very much part of our society, certainly with the EU citizens, and we wouldn't like to be referring to them as foreigners in the future. Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else from anyone else, we shall note that report. Item 12 is date and time of future meetings. So our next meeting is to be held on the 12th of March, which is a Thursday as per usual, from 2 o'clock. 13 is exclusion of press and public, but more importantly, switching off the camera and live feed so we can move on to our part B. So I shall get a nod in a moment when that has gone offline.